Hello everyone, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Andrew Tallents. I'm the founder and managing partner of the Tallents Partnership. We're proud to be partnering with Dan Wells again, the founder of Grow CEO and Grow CFO, in the presentation of these 14 webinars about self-coaching. These will be taking place on a fortnightly basis, and I will let you know about the next webinar at the end of today's session. This is the fourth in our webinar series, and today's topic is Essentialism, the disciplined pursuit of less. As before on these webinars, in my experience when we're learning, it's important to be very aware of what is going on around us so we can focus on what is important to us during the time we have together today. So let's just take a few moments to settle into our own space wherever we are and open our minds to learning something new about ourselves today. We have an hour together today. I'm going to share some content with you and get you to do some thinking about how an essentialist life could help you live your life differently. This will take around 40 minutes, and then we'll have about 20 minutes for Q&A. You don't need to write down what's on the slides today because we're posting these online, but I do need you to have a pen and paper to hand as I'm going to ask you some thought-provoking questions today. We won't be using the Q&A box today, so as we go through the webinar, if any questions come up for you, then please write them in the chat box and I will answer them at the end of the webinar. We're going to practice this now, just to make sure you know where it is. So if you can just place into the chat box if you want your first name and where you're calling in from today, and we can see if you know where the chat box is and who's on the call. Excellent, thank you. Northern Ireland, Leicester, coming from home, lovely. Lovely to see you all. Thanks to everyone for joining today. There's some new faces there as well. Some of you may have some technical problems today during the webinar, and in my experience, if this happens, it's just best to exit the webinar and rejoin. I also know Wi-Fi has been slow in recent days, so please bear with me if we get some lag. We are actually recording today's session, posting it onto the Grow portals on LinkedIn and also on my YouTube channel. So you can review the webinar at your convenience. Over the coming weeks, we'll be exploring some different aspects of self-coaching. In previous webinars, we have explored the importance of self-leadership, the question, who am I? And we also explored the question, why am I here, last time. If you didn't manage to see those webinars, you can watch them on my YouTube channel. Just type in Andrew Tallents into YouTube. Every day, I have the privilege of coaching leaders to help them fulfill their potential and be successful in life. The goal of my coaching is to explore many of the issues on this slide with the leader to enable them to start self-coaching over time so that they can sustain their success in the long term. So let's explore briefly what self-coaching is. According to the International Coach Federation, coaching is defined as a partnership with clients in a thought-provoking and creative process that inspires them to maximize their personal and professional potential. Although the concept of coaching stretches back to when Socrates was around, in modern times, coaching has played a critical role in sports such as tennis, cycling, and football. But it was Sir Tim Galloway and Sir John Whitmore who took the movement of coaching from the sporting arena into the business world in the early 1970s. Tim Galloway, who was coaching tennis students at the time, began to notice that what was going on in the mind of his students was actually hindering their learning. He started experimenting with ways of helping players learn by developing their awareness of the way they moved around the court and the way they hit the ball, not by specific instruction. He gave it the term the inner game, and he published his initial findings in the Inner Game of Tennis in 1974. Later that decade, Sir John Whitmore, an ex-racing driver who'd become interested in fields of psychology, trained with Galloway and realized that these principles could be applied to business. He continued his research, and in 1992, he published his book, Coaching for Performance. The principles of his book are still used extensively in businesses today. My day-to-day coaching style is based on both Galloway and Whitmore's approach, and is focused on enabling the leader to become more self-aware of how they can become more effective in their personal life, their current role, and career management. During my coaching sessions with my clients, we identify ways that a leader can take their learning into everyday situations. Specifically, they learn how to coach themselves in key moments in relation to decision-making and relationship building. I am ultimately enabling the leader to self-coach so that over time, they don't need to spend as much time with me, which I'm sure they're glad about. So we define self-coaching as the process of leading one's own personal development through self-leadership and the support of others to help maximize their personal and professional potential. Through self-coaching, once you have decided that you are going to lead yourself, self-leadership, and you have worked out who you are and accepting of who you are, and you have worked out your true purpose in life and why you are here, it is important next to really focus on those tasks and relationships that enable you to fulfill your purpose. And that's what we're going to talk about today. I tend to work with leaders at 3 different stages of their career. They are either newly appointed into an exciting leadership position, they are being successful in their current role and want to move through the gears to achieve even more success, or they find that they are lost in their current role and can't work out why they are lost. In any of these stages, it is critical to focus on what is essential for you to do as a leader to achieve your short-term and long-term goals. However, in my experience, many leaders choose not to focus on what is essential. When coaching leaders, I tend to find that the following issues get in the way of them focusing on what is essential for them to do. Too many meetings in the diary. I often ask the leader, who decides what goes in your diary? And invariably, it is them who decides, and yet the diary is so busy. Back-to-back meetings are in the diary with no time for reflection, and often they turn up late for meetings because they're back-to-back. Leaders also often make decisions based on either gut instinct or facts and data, rather than actually what is important to them at the time. The leader is not held accountable by their boss or their board, so there is a tendency to try and hold themselves to account and take on the habits and schedules of predecessors because it's easier and fit in around others. As a consequence of all the above, the leader chooses to spend their time managing rather than leading. So why are so many leaders inefficient and time poor? When we start in a new role, we inherit a job description and budgets and goals that were relevant before we arrived in the role. We fall into similar work patterns and habits as the previous incumbent, as the role has already been in place in the organization and there's an expectation of the role. When we are finding our feet, we don't tend to challenge or question what is expected of us as we navigate our way around the new organizational structure. Many leaders are subservient to their bosses or boards and take instructions and guidance from them on how the role should be performed, without actually challenging the outcomes and goals required of the role. Sometimes leaders can lack purpose and focus on what needs to be done in the role, and they can become reactive to the tasks and requests that are made of them, trying to squeeze as much into their day as possible to either look busy or prove they can handle anything that is thrown at them. For many of us, it is far easier to say yes to requests than say no and politely explain why it is not appropriate for us to undertake certain tasks. How many times have we agreed to take something on, knowing that we don't really have the time to do the best job possible? It is easier to say yes than no to bosses, boards, and other key stakeholders. Finally, many leaders are poor at delegating non-essential tasks to their team members or peers. This can arise due to the fact that many leaders like to maintain control, and that it's sometimes easier to do it myself than delegate and then have to do the rework when they don't meet the standards I wanted in the first place. When a leader works towards becoming an essentialist, what starts to happen? They are doing fewer tasks in a day and start to create time and space to think about essential relationships and strategy. They take sheer delight in saying no to a request when it is not essential to their role. This becomes easier over time with practice, particularly when you can identify other people that can help the person that has made the request of you. As they remove non-essential tasks, they begin to delegate more effectively, and team members start to become more engaged as they expand their own roles to support their leader. This then encourages the team members to identify what is essential for them to do, and then they start to remove non-essential tasks from their daily schedules. Becoming an essentialist enables the leader to hold themselves accountable more easily, as they have fewer tasks to do and relationships to manage. As they explain to others what their essential duties are, they ask for support from peers and team members to help hold them to account and stop them meddling in non-essential tasks. I'm sure some of you are now wondering what essentialism really is and how does it work in practice. An author called Greg McKeown published his book, Essentialism, The Disciplined Pursuit of Less, in 2014, so it's only 6 years old. Although many of his ideas were not new at the time, he managed to explain and convey the importance of disciplined focus on the pursuit of less as being critical to leadership success in the world we live in today and tomorrow. His opening statements in the book struck a chord with me last year when I read it for the first time. I remember his clear statement: prioritize your life before somebody else does it for you. Prioritize your life before somebody else does it for you. Only you as the leader of your own life can know the priorities that are important to you. Every job description can be interpreted in a variety of ways, and it is important to explain the way you want to be in the role. McKeown encourages to explore and evaluate what is truly important to us in life, rather than allowing others to dictate what they think is important for us to do in life. Once we know what is truly important, we can start to remove tasks and relationships that don't add value to what is important to us. Then he encourages us to execute only the essential tasks, removing any obstacles that stop us focusing on what is really important to us. His philosophy is extremely difficult to execute for many of us if we're not disciplined in our pursuit of less. To support us on this journey, he explains in more detail that an essentialist thinks almost everything we do is not essential to leading a successful and fulfilling life. He argues that we have the power to choose how we spend our time and where we expend our energy in order to lead this fulfilling life. He observes from his work with a variety of leaders in many organizations that almost everything that surrounds us is noise, and that very few relationships and tasks are really truly valuable to us as leaders. He talks about the importance of creating time and space in our everyday work schedules to escape and explore life more fully in different ways. Through many studies of successful leaders, he has also identified the importance of play. Listening to and embracing the wisdom of your inner child is essential to becoming more successful and fulfilled in life. Contrary to many organizational change programs, which I'm sure many of you have been involved in, he argues that making something better means subtracting something, not adding to. Too many change program leaders choose to focus on complexity and wonder why others are not prepared to follow. The road to living an essentialist life is not an easy one. Before we can become an essentialist, we need to go through the steps we have spoken about in previous webinars. Firstly, become disciplined and skilled in the art of self-leadership, leading yourself. Then understand and be accepting of who you are, and then understand with clarity why you are here and what your true purpose in life is. Then and only then can you truly ask yourself the question, what is essential for me to do to live a fulfilling life? I would like to give you now all 3 minutes just to take some time and space to reflect and answer the following question, and write down the answer on a piece of paper. It may take some time to think about the answer to this question, but it will be worth it. If you could only do one thing with your life right now that would enable you to lead a successful and fulfilling life, what would you do? If you could only do one thing with your life right now that would enable you to lead a fulfilling and successful life, what would you do? I'm going to give you 3 minutes for this exercise. I will do the same and come back to you in 3 minutes. If you are watching the webinar recording, then please pause here and restart the recording once you've actually taken the time to answer the question. Okay, never enough time, but hopefully you've thought a little bit about the answer to this question, and it really provides some great focus. Now that you've answered that question, I would like you to go a bit deeper and consider another more important question. In relation to the answer you wrote down on the piece of paper, or if it's more appropriate in relation to your current role, please answer this question. As a leader, what are the things that are essential for you to do to be successful in life that you and only you can do? When thinking about the answer, have in mind that some things that might be essential for you to be successful don't always need to be done by you. You might be interested in them, you may be good at them, but they don't need to be done by you. So for example, it might be essential for all of my clients to receive the highest possible level of administration support that they can get. But I can ask a trusted PA, like my PA Catherine, to take responsibility for that. It doesn't need to be me. So I want you to think about the things that are essential for your success that only you can do because you're you. I'll give you 5 minutes to actually think about this. And again, write the answer down in terms of the items. And if you are watching a recording, then please pause here and restart when you've answered the question. Okay, and if we can finish off writing the answer to this question. It's a really interesting exercise to do, and not enough people do it often enough, but it really does focus your mind on what's important to you. When I work with my clients and ask them the question I've just asked you, they usually respond with between 4 and 7 things that are essential that only they can do. And there's a pattern. Invariably, they include the following: lead myself effectively. Only I can do that by creating time to think and becoming a disciplined self-leader. Only I can lead my team to become high performing, stop managing them. Only I can effectively manage my stakeholders effectively to enable me to become more successful. Only I can really remove key obstacles for my team to enable them to become high performing. And only I can say no to things that are not essential for me to do. There are others, but these tend to be the ones that come up often. I'd like to take a quick anonymous poll now. I'm not going to see your name, but I'd just like to get you to answer this question. Hopefully the technology will work here. So how many of the answers on this slide have you focused on in a previous role or in your current role? Is it 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, or all 5? I'll just give you a second to respond. Thank you for voting there. So I'll just show you the result. So yeah, 57% of you have said that it's 4 of them, and that's very common, and obviously quite a few of you have got 3 or more. So this, when you boil it down in terms of really trying to understand what's essential to you, there aren't many things outside of these 5 key elements of your leadership that really most leaders should be spending time on. Thank you for doing that, Paul. So the final exercise I would like you to try, and this will add real value to you, is to think about how you can change your habits and your work practices to enable you to focus on what is essential, on what you can only do. So think about the next couple of weeks in your life. Note down all the things that you intend to do or are scheduled to do or are expected to do at the moment by others. Make a note of how many of them are essential and only you can do them. Then, looking at the ones you've listed down, remove and eliminate all non-essential tasks and meetings. Any essential tasks that you can delegate to others need to come out. And once you've completed this exercise, you'll be in a position to say no to all those tasks that are non-essential or essential and can be delegated to others, and you'll feel better for it. It won't happen easily. You'll have to find ways of doing it, but it will be worth it. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to go through this, maybe 3 or 4. And again, if you're watching the recording, just pause here and restart the recording once you've done this exercise. Okay. You may not have completed the exercise, but you can see the basics of it, and you can look at the next month as well. But you'll soon see there are many things that you're intending to do that maybe you shouldn't be doing. So many leaders on the road to becoming an essentialist ask me what would they possibly do with all the time they get back from not doing these essential, non-essential tasks. I tell them that the most successful essentialist leaders use spare time to create space to reflect, learn, and lead their teams more effectively through better communication. They sleep better at night and sometimes even power nap in the day, and they're more energized as a consequence at the start of each day. They use the space to play more and experiment with different ways of leading and living. Creating that space allows them to do that. But most importantly, they use the time to enable them to be present more often in essential relationships, both at home and at work. And that's one of the biggest things that they notice. I have many examples to draw upon that demonstrate that this approach really does work for leaders. I'd like to share 2 with you now. The first is about a chief executive of an airport I was working with. He had been recently appointed into the role, and as he had never been a CEO before, He accepted the inherited schedule of his predecessor, who was very different to him, by the way. His PA knew all about the expectations on the CEO role and asked him to trust her and could easily manage his schedule for him. And at first glance, this looked like a godsend, a helpful intervention to help him settle in. But he soon came to realize that he was attending too many pointless meetings, couldn't understand why the previous CEO had gone to these. He had no time to lead the business effectively because of these back-to-back meetings. So he took some time out with me and learned more about himself and why he was here and how he wanted to lead the airport business in his way. He then worked out what was essential for him to do that and to be successful in the role in the way that he wanted it to be, and what was essential that only he could do. He then set about delegating more responsibility to his team members, supporting them with their own personal development in the process, and he stopped attending non-essential meetings and got others to lead those meetings and contribute. He communicated to his team and his stakeholders what was essential for him to do, and that he would need support from them in making sure that he didn't spend his time on non-essential tasks. He was showing his vulnerability. He then reinforced this message by politely saying no to requests from others for him to perform those non-essential tasks he'd identified. And over a short period of time, he changed his schedule, got his PA to support him on that, so that for the first 2 hours of each day, between 8 and 10, he spent time creating the space to think about his team, the leadership of his team, the strategy, and what he had learned from the previous day, the reflection time. This made him more effective for the rest of his day, as he focused on his essential tasks and relationships. Although this sounds easy when explained in this way, it wasn't easy. It was very difficult. He had to learn how to self-coach to make sure that he could maintain his discipline in self-leadership and essentialism. But he also asked others to help him along the way. He asked for that support. He recognized that it would be very difficult for him to do it on his own. A second example demonstrates the power of understanding who you are and what you want from life, and then using this information that you have about yourself to take an opportunity of a lifetime when it presents itself. I was working with the CFO of a complex energy business. A new CEO was appointed, and the CFO could see that the CEO may need some support on the commercial and strategic aspects of the business. The CEO was from an operational background and was brought in by the board essentially to sort out some poorly performing divisions. The CFO understood who she was, why she was here, and that she wanted to broaden her skills to enable her to move into a CEO role in the future. Maybe not here, but somewhere else. She worked out what was going to be essential for her to be able to achieve this, broaden her remit, and then worked out what was essential that only she could do. She then presented a proposal to the CEO about how she could support him in the commercial and strategic aspects of the business. And this was focused in the first 12 months of his tenure, and had worked out what she needed to do to delegate to others in her team and the wider business to release her to be able to expand her role. She then provided personal development support to those leaders who were taking on more of her old duties, and they themselves grew into their new roles. The CFO felt more engaged, and the business performed more effectively over the next 6 months as a result of her proactivity. Her essentialist approach had made a difference. A quick summary of what we've covered in today's webinar before taking any questions. The road to essentialism involves developing self-leadership and asking the questions, who am I and why am I here? I need to ask myself the question, what is essential that I and only I can do to ensure that I am successful in this role? I then need to focus on what is essential and remove the non-essential from my day-to-day activities. I need to ask for support in moving towards essentialism and delegating more effectively. As we know, it's not easy. But I do know I can use the extra time gained from this approach wisely to focus even more on what is essential. I also know I can try this now by looking at what I intend to do over the next 2 to 6 weeks and change my habits accordingly to focus on the essential. So because everyone's made an effort to come on the call today and demonstrate self-leadership, I'd like to make you all an offer. If you would like to learn more about essentialism, including some of the techniques that we've explored today firsthand with my support and challenge, then I'd be delighted to offer you a complimentary 2-hour coaching session with me, and we can focus on this and add some value. This will take place in the coming weeks. I have a limited number of sessions available from today, so just drop me a note by email to register your interest in that, and we can catch up later to talk about it. For those interested in some reading, the book on the left there is Essentialism. You can get that on Kindle and also paperback. Really worth investing in. It gives you a nice process about how to go through the steps of becoming an essentialist. The second book I referred to before, Covey's work, is all about prioritization, knowing who you are, and really becoming very focused on what you do. If you're feeling that this is quite a difficult task and it's going to feel like a long way away for you, then I would recommend reading Getting Things Done First by David Allen. This is a really useful, pragmatic book that teaches you how to, again, remove tasks or delegate tasks or refocus the way you do work just to become more productive in the first place, so that you can start creating some space and time for yourself to think about the things that are important to you and the things that are essential. So thanks for listening today. We're going to go into the Q&A now, and I'm going to let you type into the chat box if you do have any questions. While you're doing that, I'll tell you when the next webinar is. It's going to be on the 25th of June at 11 a.m. And we're going to be talking about resilience, and it follows on nicely from here, because resilience is all about, once you've decided what's essential for you to do, how do you maintain that when it's difficult, when you've got other things coming to you? How do you maintain that level of performance by being resilient? And we'll spend the webinar doing that. But what we'll do is we'll have a look at the chat box to see any questions that are coming through. So we've got a question here which says, Andrew, is your advice changing for new starters in the current climate, as we are not in a business as usual environment? It's a really good question. For me, whether we're in the current environment or the new environment, what I would say is that in terms of this approach of essentialism, the danger is if you actually react to the environment that you find yourself in, then it's very difficult to actually do the things that you want to do in the way you want to do them. And people will prioritize your job for you, because there's obviously lots of things going on. So I still think the advice that we're talking about today in terms of this essentialist approach is as valid today, tomorrow, in the future, because it's all about you understanding what's important to you to being successful. Now, in this current climate, it might be that being successful is to actually be more agile and to maybe take a few more risks and to maybe be a bit more experimental. And if you work out that's essential for you to do to be successful in the role, then that's what you should create time to do. So I still think the advice through both those books, those 3 books that I mentioned, and Essentialism, is valid for new starters in this environment as well. Be bold in the way you start. Another question, is it possible to influence someone else to be more effective at leading themselves, either someone who reports to you or who you work with closely, particularly where their work has an impact on me? Really good question. Thank you for that one. It's a really important distinction. You can't control somebody else to be more effective, but yes, you can influence them. And the way that you can influence them is in 2 ways, in my view and my experience. The first is you've got to role model the behavior you want to see in them. So if you want somebody to be more effective at leading themselves, you have to be effective at leading yourself. And if you're effective at leading yourself and you can focus on what's essential, it means that you can delegate more effectively, which means you're asking them, who reports into you, to step up and to actually look at what they need to do more effectively to cope with the work that's coming down to them that you're delegating. So obviously you would support them in this, and it's important to support them, so you can influence them. And the key thing, I think, is a second point around influencing them is about having clear lines of accountability. And that's down to your self-leadership again. So if you agree with your direct report that you're delegating non-essential tasks to them and that you expect it to get done, it might not be them, it might be somebody else in their team or a peer, and you are very clear about the consequences to you and the wider team in the business of them not achieving what you've asked them to do, then that clear accountability will influence them in terms of how effective they will be. So they're the two things for me: role modeling and also making sure that the accountability management is in there. Next question is, how do you handle it when things you can do depends on your boss fulfilling his part of the bargain? Well, again, it's a really good question, and it links into accountability. I think many of us as leaders tend to have this subservient relationship with our boss. And what I encourage a lot of my clients to do is, it's a peer-to-peer relationship. It's about managing a peer-to-peer relationship. And the only way that you can actually do what we're talking about here to ensure that he fulfills his part of the bargain is by showing vulnerability and by actually saying that you are trying to do this to become more effective, to make his or her life easier, and that you need their support in doing that. And one of the ways that you can do this is actually ask for feedback from your boss about when you're trying to do these things and how it's affecting them. So catching you in the moment doing it, the essentialism, and then asking the boss for them for feedback about what that meant for them in terms of how effective it was. And hopefully then they can see that that's working in the moment. So again, it's holding your boss to account. It's really difficult, but it is a peer-to-peer relationship. They have a responsibility to let you lead yourself as well. Another question: how are you advising your client? How are you advising your clients to build relationships with their teams remotely? This has come up a lot in the work that I'm doing with CFOs and CEOs at the moment. What I'm finding is that there's a frustration there in the leader, that particularly if they're newly appointed into a role or they've got new team members or there's a different structure, they feel they can't get to know the individuals because they prefer to meet them face to face, and it's very difficult over video. I understand that to a certain extent. And also they're frustrated with the fact that time is precious, and we don't have enough time to actually really get people to express their views and to give them the time and space. It all feels very rushed. We're going from meeting to meeting. So the way that they're managing that effectively is three things really. The first thing they're doing is a lot of pre-work prior to the remote meetings to actually get the attendees and members to think before the meeting about the content and what they might be able to offer. And then what they're doing is actually giving spotlight moments to each of those members on the call to actually present what their thoughts and opinions are on the material they've read, so that you don't go through the call actually covering the material. So the actual content of the meetings are actually focused on the opinions, discussion, debate that needs to happen to come to a conclusion. And then what the leader is then doing is bringing all that, synthesize it in terms of a summary and discussion at the end of it. So that's the first thing they're doing. The second thing they're doing is then making sure that everyone's held to account, that everyone understands that if they don't do the prep work before the actual meeting, that they're impacting the effectiveness of the meeting themselves, and that there are consequences if they don't actually do the prep because they're affecting the dynamic of the meeting, and making it clear what those consequences are. So that's the second piece. And then the third piece is actually, again, role modeling and self-leading to make sure that you as the leader do the things that you say you're going to do. So that's what I'm finding in terms of remote management and what leaders are doing to build really good relationships with their teams. And then in their one-to-ones, again, keeping it nice and tight with prep work, focusing what's important to the team member in the meeting, and then following through afterwards in terms of clear actions, removing any obstacles for the team member. Another question here, and thank you for these. If it was essential to show more gravitas, how would you demonstrate this as a CFO, particularly where independence is important in a PE-backed company and may have a new CEO? That's a really good question, and gravitas is a really interesting word because gravitas is subjective. So gravitas is either in the perception of you as the CFO, or gravitas could be perceived as being the perception of somebody else viewing you as a CFO. So although this is a very in-depth question, I'd be very happy to explore this with you offline. For me, it comes back to this self-leadership, understanding who you are, understanding why I'm here, and then living that, and that breeds gravitas, or for me, authenticity. Because people see you what you are for, what you're there for, what your purpose is, and you live your purpose. And with a new CEO that's been appointed, it's a great opportunity because it means, as in the second case study I presented to you, you've got a real chance to tell the new CEO about how you work, how you prefer to work, who you are and what it is you're there for and what you're best suited to doing, and that you'd love to take off elements of their job, the bits that you really are good at. So I think there's a real opportunity with that. I think the PE, usually in my experience, are very straightforward to work with in the sense of it's very clear. You've got to perform the numbers. And then it's about how you do that within your own, comfortably being your own skin and making sure you do that in an authentic way. So I know that's a much more deeper question, answer that's required there, but hopefully that gives you some insight. A top tip here that's come in. CFO told me this week she is working on Zoom with one or two of the team to create an office environment, for example, working on a budget together, or so they can ask tips spontaneously. So that's a really great example of collaboration online. What Zoom allows you to do as well is create the breakout rooms so that maybe two of you can go into one room to another and then bring back the learning. So I've seen that work very effectively. So thank you for that tip. So we're coming up to 10 to 12. I really appreciate you all staying on. I think I'd finish off by saying that what we've talked about today really does make a difference in all of my clients' coaching. It is difficult to do, and you really, if you can, try and get the support of your PA or somebody that's really close to you to help you with this, to block the diary, make sure people don't come into it, because creating and protecting that space is going to be one of the most important things in the success of this. So as there are no more questions coming through, thank you for the interactive session. Thanks for taking the time to think. If you do want to take the offer of spending more time with me, just follow up after this webinar. And I hope to see you on the 25th of June at 11 o'clock. Enjoy the rest of the day and hope you enjoy leading an essentialist life. Goodbye.